welcome back to Amoeba Savant. My name is Nalinne Jones and I am reading The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is book 2, chapter 1. An Incongruous Gathering is the name of book 2, and chapter 1 is called They Arrive at the Monastery. It was a beautiful, clear, warm day in late August. The elder was to receive them at about 11:30. Immediately after late Mass. Our visitors did not attend the service, but arrived just as it was over. They drove up in 2 carriages. The first, an elegant barouche drawn by 2 fine horses, brought Peter Musov and a distant relative, Peter Karamazov. He was a young man of 20 or so who was preparing to enter the university, but Musov, with whom for some reason he was living for at the moment, was trying to persuade him to accompany him abroad to attend the university in either Zurich or Jena and obtain his degree there. Karamazov had not yet made up his mind. He seemed absorbed in his thoughts and rather absent-minded. He had a pleasant face, was well built and quite tall. At times there was a strange fixity in his gaze. Like all absent-minded people, he would often stare at you for a long time without seeing you. I'm feeling called out right now. He was silent and rather awkward, but sometimes when he was alone with another person, he would suddenly become talkative, effusive, and was liable to burst out laughing quite unaccountably. He always dressed well, indeed with studied elegance. He had an independent income even then, and had even more sizable expectations. He and Alyosha were good friends. The second carriage, a jolting but roomy old hired carriage, which was drawn by a pair of sedate pinkish-gray horses, and which kept falling behind Musov's barouche, or barouche? Let me know in the comments how to say it, brought Mr. Karamazov and his son Ivan. As to Dmitri, he was late, although he had been informed in advance of the day and the time they were to meet. The visitors left their carriages outside the monastery wall near an inn and entered the gates on foot. I do not believe any of them, except Mr. Karamazov, had ever been in a monastery before, and as to Musov, it is unlikely that he had seen the inside of a church for a good 30 years. He looked around him with a certain curiosity, trying nevertheless to appear quite casual about it all. But there was nothing there to interest a man of his mentality, except perhaps the architecture of the church and the buildings where the monks lived. Though even they were quite ordinary. The last of the worshippers were coming out of church, bareheaded and crossing themselves, meaning doing this. Among the simple people there were a few better-class people, 2 or 3 ladies and a very old general, all of whom were staying at the nearby inn. Beggars surrounded our visitors as soon as they appeared, but nobody gave them anything except for young Karamazov, who dug a 10-kopeck piece out of his purse and, for some reason looking very embarrassed, pushed it hurriedly into one woman's hand, muttering something like, "to share among you." None of his companions commented on his act, so there seemed no reason for further embarrassment, but when he became aware of it, he grew even more confused. It was rather strange, though. There really should have been someone to receive them, and perhaps even with some esteem. One of them had just recently donated 1,000 rubles to the monastery, and another was one of the wealthiest landowners in the district. He was considered one of the best educated of men, and his decision about the fishing rights on the river could determine the whole course of the litigation. But none of the monastery officials came out to meet them. Musov gazed abstractedly at the graves in the churchyard and was about to remark that the dead had to pay a very high price for the privilege of being buried in this holy place, but he let it pass, for his usual ironic, liberal tone was turning into something like anger. Rosie wants out of the room. One sec. Every time I close the door, she wants out, and I end up messing up the setup. Ugh. Okay, I think that'll do. Sorry. Let's see. Where was I? Blah, 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 blah. Quote, holy place, liberal tone, blah, blah. Damn it, isn't there anyone to direct us in this chaos? He muttered, as if talking to himself. I laugh because he's in church and he's saying, damn it. We must find out, because it will soon be time for us to go back. Then all of a sudden a middle-aged, balding gentleman in a loose summer coat walked up to them. He raised his hat and, feeling that it would not be dignified for him to say anything... What? Incorrect. I'm having a moment, sorry. Then all of a sudden a middle-aged, balding gentleman in a loose summer coat walked up to them. He raised his hat and, looking at them ingratiatingly, introduced himself to the whole party in a mellifluous voice. He was a landowner named Maximov from near Tula. He immediately did his best to be helpful to them. The elder Zosima lives in his Hermitage, he lisped. He lives in complete seclusion, you know. Am I supposed to lisp? It's about 400 yards from the monastery on the other side of that little wood over there. I know it's on the other side of the wood, Mr. Karamazov told him. The only trouble is we don't quite remember the way. We haven't been here for a long time. Well, you can go through that gate over there and then straight through the wood, straight through. Wouldn't you like me? I'll be glad to show you. You see, I myself have to... It's this way, please. They went through the gate and crossed the little wood with Maximov, a man of about 60, trotting along beside them and examining them with an almost morbid curiosity, his eyes almost starting from his head. You see, we've come here on private business, Musov said sternly. We have been granted what we may call an audience by the person in question, and therefore grateful though we are to you for showing us the way, we won't be able to invite you to come in with us. I've already been there, seen him, un chevalier parfait, Maximov said, raising his hand and snapping his fingers. Who is a chevalier? Musov asked. The elder. He is admirable. That elder is the pride and glory of the monastery. An elder such as Zosima... But his incoherent speech was cut short by a small cowled monk, pale and haggard, who just then caught up with them. As Mr. Karamazov and Mr. Musov stopped, the monk bowed almost from the waist and said in a most courteous tone, After your visit to the Hermitage, gentlemen, the Father Superior invites you to dinner. If possible, no later than 1 o'clock. And then turning to Maximov, he added, And you too, sir. I will certainly be there, exclaimed Mr. Karamazov, delighted at the invitation. I wouldn't miss it for anything. And let me say, we have all promised to behave properly while we're here. What about you, Mr. Musov? Are you coming too? Of course I will come. I came here primarily to study monastery customs, after all. The only thing that troubles me is that I'm here with you, Mr. Karamazov. But where's Dmitri? He hasn't shown up yet, Mr. Karamazov remarked. I wouldn't mind if he didn't come at all, Musov said. Do you really think I relish all these squabbles between you two? Your presence alone is bad enough. Please thank the Father Superior for his invitation, then, he said to the monk. We will be there for dinner. Yes, sir, but first I have been told to take you to the elder, the monk said. And I, Maximov lisped, will go straight to the Father Superior since we've been invited. The Father Superior is rather busy just now, the monk said hesitatingly, but of course it is up to you, sir. What an awful bore that old man is, Mr. Musov said as Maximov trotted off back toward the monastery. He reminds me of von Son, Mr. Karamazov announced unexpectedly. What makes you say that? In what way is he like von Son? Have you ever set eyes on von Son? I've seen his picture, but I didn't say they looked alike. It's difficult to explain. This man is just another von Son. I can tell simply by looking at him. Well, I suppose you're an expert in these matters. But let me remind you of one thing, Mr. Karamazov. You said yourself a moment ago that we had promised to behave decently while we are here, and I'd like you to remember it. I warn you, restrain yourself, for if you start playing the fool, I have absolutely no intention of allowing it to reflect on me. You see what kind of a man he is, Musov said, turning to the monk. I'm quite afraid to visit respectable people with him. A suspicion of a smile appeared on the wan, bloodless lips of the monk. A hint of sly amusement, but he kept silent, obviously feeling that it would not be dignified for him to say anything. This only deepened Musov's frown as he thought to himself, and to hell with the lot of them. It has taken them centuries to learn to keep that imperturbable face, and underneath they're nothing but a bunch of charlatans. Here is the Hermitage at last, Mr. Karamazov announced, but the gates are shut. And he proceeded to cross himself vigorously before the saints' images painted above and beside the gates. When in Rome, do as the Romans, he remarked. Altogether, there are 25 saints busy saving their souls in this Hermitage, staring at one another and eating cabbage. And the most remarkable thing about it is that not a single woman is allowed through these gates. And that's the truth. But then, how can that be, since I've heard that the elder receives ladies? He asked, suddenly addressing the monk. There are women here right now, sir. Peasant women, the monk replied. See, over there, sitting and waiting under that wooden gallery. And above the gallery, but beyond the walls, where those windows are, there are 2 special rooms for ladies. When he's well enough to receive them, the elder reaches those rooms by an inside passage, for they are outside the Hermitage wall, sir. At this moment, for instance, there is a lady waiting for him there with her sick daughter. She's a landowner from Kharkov province, Mrs. Koklakov is her name. I expect he must have promised to come out to her, although recently he has been so weak that he has hardly shown himself even to the poor people. Well, so there is a secret passage from the Hermitage to the ladies after all. But please, Holy Father, you mustn't think for a moment that I'm implying anything. I was just wondering. But on Mount Athos, you may know perhaps, they keep out not only women but all creatures of the female sex, like hens, turkey hens, cows. Mr. Karamazov, please, Musov said. If you go on like this, I'll walk out on you, and once I've left, they'll turn you out too. That I can promise you. I don't see why what I say should affect you, Mr. Musov. But look at that! Karamazov suddenly exclaimed, stepping through the gate onto the Hermitage grounds. These people live in a regular rose garden. Although there were no roses in the Hermitage garden, there were many rare and beautiful autumn flowers that had been planted wherever there was room for them, and it was clear that they were tended by a skillful hand. There were also flower beds all around the church and between the graves in the churchyard. The elder's cell was in a small wooden one-story house with a porch before the entrance, which was also surrounded by flowers. I wonder if it was like this under the previous elder, the elder Barsonofi, Mr. Karamazov asked as he walked up the front steps. I understand he didn't go in for refinement, and that he even had a propensity for suddenly leaping up and using his stick on persons of the female sex. The elder Barsonofi did at times seem a little strange, the monk said, but many of the stories that are told about him are nonsense. In any case, he certainly never used a stick on anybody. And now, gentlemen, I beg you to wait here a minute while I announce you. For the last time, Mr. Karamazov, Musov warned him again hurriedly in a threatening whisper, remember your promise to behave, or I'll make you pay for it. I really cannot see why you should be so excited, Karamazov replied sarcastically, unless you're worrying about your sins at last. Why, they say he can tell just by a man's eyes what's troubling him. And anyway, why should the opinion of these people be so important to you, a Parisian and an enlightened gentleman? You really amaze me. But before Musov could answer this sarcasm, they were asked to come in. He entered feeling rather irritated. I know myself. I'm irritated now, and I'll start arguing and lose my temper. I will discredit both myself and my ideas, he thought. And that was chapter 1 of book 2. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video where I read the next chapter. Bye.